Mere words can't describe how unbelievably grotesque the butchering of the Stiles family was. I was unfortunate enough to be among the first few officers to the scene. My name is Quinn. Officer James Quinn. Welcome to the night that legend became reality. Growing up in Dixon, you hear all kinds of tall tales and ghost stories, mostly meant to just keep the kids from venturing out into the woods at night. But there's one legend that seems to hold a grip on this town, one that's been told since even my grandparents were kids, and that's the legend of the Woodsman. The legend of the Woodsman was birthed from the tragedy of a man named Lawrence Davies, a local lumberyard worker who went mad after losing his wife and his daughter. It's said that the pain was too unbearable for the lumberjack to cope with, and seeing other families together and smiling enraged him, for all he could see was what was taken from him. So, to soothe his burning rage, he disappeared into the woods and vowed never to return. For months, nobody had heard from or seen Mr. Davies. Many people had claimed to see smoke bellowing from a small log cabin, barely big enough to be a hunting shack, but nobody had dared to approach it. That is, until October 26, 1931. A family of three, a father, a mother, and a daughter, were found brutally slaughtered in a small clearing about 500 feet from the cabin. The father's head was nearly split in half with what could only have been a dull wood-splitting axe. The mother had a wide gash across her back from being struck while trying to escape, with their daughter in her arms. And the daughter, that poor little girl, trapped under her mother's lifeless body, was completely decapitated, but her head was nowhere to be found, at least until the search party found the cabin. There, in front of the cabin, hanging on the drying rack next to a couple of gutted rabbits, there was the little girl's head. The party burst through the door of the cabin to find Lawrence sleeping on a makeshift bed of logs and animal hides. Without warning, they started beating and pounding until Lawrence was barely recognizable. So, beaten, bruised, and bloody, they dragged Lawrence outside the cabin and threw him to the ground as half of them started building a pyre. He was to burn for the sins he committed. No arrest, no trial, no judge, only execution. When the pyre was constructed, they tied him to it and asked if there was anything he'd like to say, expecting a confession of guilt. But the only thing to escape his mouth was, "You'll regret this, all of you, and your kin." They lit the pyre. Not one scream of pain came from Lawrence. It was as if something else had taken over. After a few minutes of burning, the rope eventually snapped and his lifeless heap of a corpse fell to the ground. You couldn't recognize his face anymore. There was no hair left on his head, and his nose had been completely burned off, and his mouth melted shut. Over the years, there have been a multitude of claims from old-timers to young teens claiming to have seen an axe-wielding man with no hair, no mouth or nose, only black eyes, traipsing through the woods. But there's never been a claim of anything like this. As I'm standing here in disbelief, gazing in horror at the scene before me, a father's head split in half, a mother with a wide gash across her back, and a decapitated child. Here, of all places, this little clearing in the woods. The Stiles were good people, and they did not deserve this. I managed to break my gaze and look up. There, about 500 feet in the distance, I see him. The Woodsman.